Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Path 11 podcast. My guest today is a familiar face with Path 11. My guest, Kelvin Chin, was on episode 263, Overcoming the Fear of Death. We were talking about that book that he had, and we were just talking about death, the fear of death. I learned a lot about meditations. I ended up taking him up on his offer of participating in some of his meditation courses, which were excellent and great. And he is back here with us because he has written another book. I'll show it to you guys who are watching. Marcus Aurelius Updated. So if you haven't listened to episode 263, let me tell you a little bit about Kelvin Chin. He is the executive director and founder of the Turning Within Meditation and Overcoming the Fear of Death Foundations. He's an internationally recognized meditation teacher, featured in Business Insider, Newsweek, Kaiser Health News, has spoken at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco, and taught at West Point and in the U.S. Army, including on the DMZ in Korea. He's been meditating for 50 years. He doesn't even look that old, okay? Teaching it for 47 and has had many experiences piercing the veil. And his past life memories go back 6,000 years. So an old soul we have here. He's the author of the new book that we're going to be talking about again. That is Marcus Aurelius, Updated 21st Century Meditations on Living Life. And this is a collection of essays ranging from emotions, life principles, meditation, and the spiritual. His first book, Overcoming the Fear of Death, is also a bestseller, and he is taught in healthcare and universities, is a graduate of Dartmouth, Yale, and Boston College Law, and has lived in 7 countries. So, Kelvin, welcome back to the Path 11 podcast.
Great to be here again with you, April. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, nice to see you. So this book, so when I saw the cover, I have no idea who Marcus Aurelius was. Looks like a very interesting fellow here. So the cover is really interesting. So why don't you take us back a little bit to the creation of this book, and why was it inspired by Marcus?
Yeah, so Marcus Aurelius was a philosopher, but also a Roman emperor in the 2nd century. So he is considered perhaps the last of the great Roman emperors in what they call the Pax Romana, which is the peaceful, the more or less peaceful, although they were always at war, but the more or less settled time of the Roman Empire. And this picture of him on the cover that you point out here on the cover of the book is actually it's a bust, a statue, a bust of him, and from the museum in Rome, Italy. And this is a rendition of him when he was about 15 years old. So it was before, obviously, he became emperor. But I chose this particular, statue of him because it's not the usual one that everybody usually sees when he's older and when he was emperor. So I thought I'd pick something different. But like I said, he was a philosopher first, and in his own mind, anyway. Of course, once you become Roman emperor of about a quarter of the world's population, that's what the Roman emperor around that time period was the leader of. 25% of the world's population. But his focus was being on thinking about life. So when I say philosopher, what does that mean? Thinking about life in a practical, pragmatic way. He was a Stoic philosopher, a student of Stoicism, which we generally today, I think most people think of, being Stoic as being like non-emotional and so forth. And that's really not true. That's not accurate in terms of the actual philosophy of Stoicism. It's kind of an extension or a kind of something that people have taken from that and distilled it down into that simplistic way of looking at it. But really, Stoicism was a very practical way of looking at life. How can we improve the quality of living our life more fully in the present moment, regardless of what's going on around us, et cetera, which, as you probably know from taking my meditation class, April, and also from hearing me in the first discussion, my other book, that's the way I look at life too, is how can we improve our lives now in the continual present, regardless, as you said, my memories go back 6,000 years, but so what? I have past life memories. I'm living now as Kelvin Chin in 2021. So that's the way he viewed life. And so I resonated with this, with his view. And that's why, I chose to call it Marcus Aurelius Updated and started with some of his maxims in the beginning of the book.
Great. And just curious I know you have been tapped into some of your past lives. Do you have any connection of that era, of that lifetime? Were you once him or what?
Well, since you went right there, the short answer is yes, yes, and yes. So it unfolded in my awareness, as you may remember. We talked about how past lives memories can come about in a very non-linear way. And then I got external corroboration from other people and sources and so forth, not past life regression people, but people who don't know me. And we compared notes and so forth. And so the short answer is yes.
Okay, very cool. I'm sure my listeners are extremely intrigued, but we'll leave it at that. How about that? Because we have lots to get through today.
Yes.
Okay, so question number 1 started right off the bat when I got into actually the very first chapter here, which were your favorite meditations by Marcus. Mm-hmm. And when I got to, it says 5.37, free will and destiny. So what you do here is you kind of give a quote from him. And I'll read it just so my listeners and viewers have a reference of what we're talking about here. And this is quoted from Marcus. There was a time long past when fate was kind to me, a common tragic lament from the 2nd century. But the truly fortunate person has created his own good fortune through good habits of the soul, good intentions, and good actions. And then Kelvin comes in to write, Marcus is talking about free will and destiny, in parentheses fate, in this maxim. We each have the free will to do whatever we choose. We have personal choice. And based on those choices, certain consequences to our thoughts and actions follow. And then this is what I wanted to talk about. There is no such thing as absolute destiny or fate. Everything is subject to change depending on the choices we make. So I'm always questioning people about free will and fate because it does feel like I've had some experiences in my life. Now, granted, there were choices that were made that got me to some of these, what I would call synchronistic events that almost seem to me like it had to have been planned or that it was destined, even though I made some of these choices. But can you go a little bit further when you say such a statement that there is no such thing as absolute destiny or fate? Because some things that have happened in my life feel like that they were fate and destined.
So the key words that you just said in your description of we'll call it your life experience, is that even though I made choices, and that's the key. So what I'm saying here and what he's saying and is that absolute destiny in the sense of it's all planned out. There are no choices. We have no influence on anything we do in life. That's really what destiny means. Now, you may use it in a different way, and that's okay, but you may use it more loosely. But that's not the way in philosophy, in the way people think about ontological things from a philosophical standpoint. Ontological means the state of being, the universe, etc. They don't use destiny in that way. It's not it's not used loosely. It means you can't do anything. You have no choices. You may think you have choices, but you really don't. That's what destiny really means. What I'm saying and what Marcus is saying is that we do make choices and we can influence things. And not only that, but other people make choices and trillions of other. Now, okay, the trillionth person out there who's making a choice has a very, very minimal effect on my life, okay? But is it a little teeny, eensy-weensy, microscopic ripple effect that they even have? Yes, right? Of course, the people who are closer to me and you and I right now, we're engaging in a conversation, have more direct influence in what I'm going to say and thinking and doing and so forth, so on. But everybody, we forget, I think a big part of this whole free will destiny discussion is one of the fundamental things people forget is it's not just about us. It's what about other people and their influence and what they think. And don't they have choices? And if they have choices, and then they have choices, and then that's when you get to quadrillions of people or beings having choices. The animals, our pets, have choices. They're making choices. They're affecting us. All of that, it's not just my free will choices that are controlling my life. Look, obvious example, I don't know anybody in Congress. I don't know anybody in the U.S. Congress. I don't know any of those people, But are they influencing me? Absolutely. They're making laws that I got to follow, and as it influence, how I drive through an intersection, the state legislatures and all the legislators and all this stuff. Yes, I don't know any of these people, but they're influencing me, and their choices, their free will choices, are affecting my free will choices. Now, to your point, though, here's where the confusion, I think, arises, is when we do make a plan, whether it's a business plan or whether we can talk about it more esoterically in terms of a soul plan on the other side before we come into this lifetime. Or we can make plans during this lifetime that are more esoteric too, so forth. But whatever, doesn't matter. Can we make plans? Absolutely, yes. And I agree, and I encourage people to. I think we should. I think we should think more strategically and plan things out, whether we're on the other side or this side or in business or relationships or whatever. Look, I did a short talk. It's on my YouTube channel. People can check it out on dating, online dating, and soulmates. Should we think more strategically about these things in these relationships? Absolutely, yes. But do we have full control over everything? No. That's what destiny means. So your experience is very real, and lots of people have had that experience. And so I'm not saying that's not real. That is real. I've had that experience hundreds of times in my lifetime so far, right? Because I'm a lot older than you are. But anyway, but that's real. But it doesn't mean that I am in full control of everybody in the universe and that I can control everything. That's what destiny means. Okay?
Gotcha. All right. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
So one of the things I really like about this book, and, for the readers who are going to pick it up, is that it is really nice that you've broken it down into like these 67 chapters or essays. Yeah. Because I love books like that where you can just flip around and pick something, randomly or maybe by free will or choice and read it. Yeah. So, it's like broken up into a bunch of different things. So the next place where I want to go to is emotions, right? And we're hopping over to page 59. I wanted you to talk more about this. The dangers of emotionally feeling good. So this was really interesting. And I just love how you talked about, I don't know, I almost have everything highlighted here, but basically how it just feels like we're always trying to race to this end goal of, well, if I feel good, then I'm happy and then life is really good. And I'll let you kind of take it over from there. But there is a danger in kind of always shooting for that to be this unrealistic, I think, end game. Yeah,
it's just, there's nothing wrong with, first of all, caveat, there's nothing wrong with feeling good. And we all like to feel good. It's not, and it's not a bad objective to want to feel good. Okay, that's not the point of this essay. The point is it's dangerous, meaning it is risky. We increase our risk if we're always all about feeling good. And my observation of the human race over these last 6,000 years that I'm aware of anyway, is that we fall into that pattern or trap or whatever you want to call it of always seeking the feel-good feeling. And the feel-good feeling is not always, and I talk about it, here, the risk of it, alcohol, drugs, cults, groups that support our beliefs, whether they're religious, cultural, or political, at the exclusion of all other thinking. That's, I wrote this, quite frankly, thinking about the current climate in the United States, and around the world, where we're getting so tribal in our thinking, and it makes us feel good. Oh, I feel good. I'm part of a group. I feel wanted, I feel supported and all that kind of stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. But what I suggest is that in the essay is that we need to balance that. Life is about balance. Life is always about balance. There's nothing wrong with emotionally feeling good, but we need to balance it with our rational thinking. And that's when people start going awry and start getting down the danger road, so to speak, where they may actually hurt themselves because they're not paying attention to where they're driving, so to speak. They're just going to where it feels good and so forth without looking at the road. And so the looking at the road in the analogy is the rational thinking. Does it make sense? Am I staying? Does it make sense to what somebody is telling me about how I should be thinking? And I say this, and you've heard me say this in the classes you've taken with me. I always say to people, I'm teaching people how to think for themselves as much as humanly possible. Now, I give you guidance and approaches and perspectives and even content. But I tell my students, question what I'm saying too, because I'm teaching you how to think for yourself. And that's where the rubber meets the road always, because I think we're eternal beings, always figuring things out for ourselves. But this whole idea of cognitive dissonance and the idea of thinking clearly we talk about that in that essay also. What is cognitive dissonance? There's a lot of cognitive dissonance in the world where people will think this and they'll do something else, or they'll think it and they'll not think it clearly. It's cognitive inconsistency. There's lack of logic sometimes. I watch a lot of sports. I'll just give people a quick example. It's like you see this in sports all the time. NFL, okay, football. All the coaches will say at the beginning or preseason, they'll say, "Our goal is the Super Bowl. Our goal is to win it all. We want to win the Super Bowl. That's what we're focused on. That's where we're all in. The team is all in on that." Okay, that's great. Then go look and see what their behavior is, right? This star can show up late for practice. Oh, this one, was drunk. This one did this, and this one's not really working out. Where's so-and-so? We're doing a drill over here. Where is he? Oh, he's in there. He's sending he's taking a, Instagram picture or something. These are coaches who are cognitively dissonant. They are not walking their talk, basically. And I'm just using that as an example because everybody can probably go, "Oh yeah, I've seen that with my team. They just don't do that. They don't walk their talk. They're not in the Super Bowl. Why? Now, it's not always, you're not going to always make it to the Super Bowl if you're consistent with your thinking, but you have to start there. And so my point is that whether it's the NFL or whether it's our spiritual goals, we got to think consistently. And as you know, with my book, this book, and all my work, it's all about helping people live life more enjoyably. The pursuit of happiness is the goal always. And so how can we balance our emotions with our rational thinking and get to where we want to go? That's the purpose of that essay.
Yeah.
The dangers of emotionally feeling good.
And speaking of the NFL, I think I also might have bookmarked you gave an example about Tom Brady and how he kind of used, the fact that I don't have the number, but, he wasn't one of the top draft picks. And, he really worked. I actually recently had gotten his book out of the library, about how he really trained and how he was really trying to live up to and work to be the best. But he wasn't the strongest. He wasn't the fastest. He didn't have the best body. But that training that man has gone through and how focused he is and the way that he takes care of his body and the nutrition and all of that kind of proves, that one doesn't have to live up to what others think of them.
Yeah, it goes to several things. One is the free will. Making those personal choices that he has made throughout his life.
Right.
Notwithstanding other people saying he's too skinny. I mean, if you see pictures of him at the combine, it's kind of a joke. I mean, he looks like he's, what is he, 6'4", 6'5"? He looks like he's about 120, 130 pounds. I mean, it's ridiculous. did you eat? Have you eaten in the last 3 months? I mean, and then he ran like his 40, they timed the 40-yard, dash, and he sprinted for like, I don't know, 6 seconds or something ridiculously slow. But he has worked on all of that. And so he's made these personal choices. But the other thing is about Brady, and he's a good example of this, is the internal. He's gone inside. He is focused. Why? Because his mind is strong. He has turned within. Now, did Tom meditate? Yeah, Tom actually meditated for a minute. I don't know if he still does regularly or whatever, but he and Giselle learned when she was, I think, 17 or something like that to meditate. And then they got together obviously long after that. But in her 30s or something. But she got him into meditation. And so whether he still does or doesn't, he still turns within, which is what, as I call my meditation process, turning within. And it's about us turning within. Whether you do my meditation or some other meditation or some other process, we need to turn within and connect. And that's what he's done throughout his career. Now, he may not articulate it in those exact words that I just said, but if you see any interviews with him, that's what he's saying.
Oh, absolutely. Right? Yeah. And I mean, It seems to me in some of the podcasts that I've listened to with him too, is that he really does have the mental training, kind of the envisioning of how it's already going to happen, the whole manifestation thing, and really not accepting anything less, like seeing himself already there as if it's already happened.
Right. Now, that technique that you talk about, the visualization that a lot of people probably who's listening to this or watching this probably have practiced either individually or in a workshop or whatever, those are all good techniques. I've done those too. But the issue, here's where the rubber meets the road. They're only as effective, let's say good. They're only as effective as the degree to which your mind is powerful. If your mind is weak and you're doing a visualization technique, it's not going to be very effective. Your mind, you have to strengthen the mind. That's when the visualization in these techniques really, that's when they become meaningful. Whether it's Phil Jackson with the Michael Jordan and the Bulls and so forth, because Phil has meditation training as well. Phil Jackson, the coach.
What they call him, the Zen Master?
Yeah, they call him the Zen Master.
The Zen Master,
exactly. Yeah. But it's making the mind more powerful, and then you do the visualization. Then it actually you manifest it more likely. It's all probabilities. The free will is always existing there, but it's probabilities so we can create a plan to make that free throw, or to win that Super Bowl, or to make that touchdown. But the plan is there. We got to execute, right? And the execution is based on the power of our mind and so forth. And the power of our mind is increasing the probabilities that we will make the touchdown.
Right. And a trained mind will get you there much quicker.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Awesome. Cool. Okay. Let's go to essay 107, page 107. And this is section Sex and Spirituality. So a lot of our listeners and viewers are aware that Path 11 produced the Sacred Sexual Music Festival. It was a festival that was held usually in person in Vancouver, Canada, but because of the pandemic, they went virtual. So we said, sure, we'll host it for you. And it was really eye-opening for me. I mean, I really didn't have many conversations about sexuality and spirituality on the podcast before. So a lot of these presenters really talked about that, and in so many different ways with the energy centers. They connected it to yoga. They connected it to numerology, the fifth dimension, consciousness. I mean, it was covered in all many different aspects. So when I, was going through your book and found sex and spirituality on page 107 here, I thought, okay, yeah, let's talk about this again and give it from like another perspective of where you're coming from it, because you kind of touch upon what are the beliefs about sex. Is sex wrong? Who started this thinking that sex was wrong or lesser? Is it neutral? And you gave some really good examples. So can you talk a little bit more about this essay?
Sure. I think I was inspired to write this because this was several years ago I wrote this essay. These are a collection of essays that I've been writing probably over the last 6 years or so. this one I wrote, 4 or 5 years ago. And I was inspired to write it because I don't know exactly what the event or the article or whatever the incident was that stimulated it. But this whole notion that we are such a bottled up society worldwide, especially in America, once the Puritans came over, in the beginning days in the 1600s, I seriously think that this is a big part that misunderstandings about sex are a big part of a lot of the guilt and the shame and the baggage that people are carrying around, and this is worldwide. Yeah. But and I thought about this, and I said, well, where does this idea that sex is somehow bad, lesser, wrong in some cultures and belief systems, where's it come from? And I think it comes from thousands and thousands of years ago, this idea that, mostly guys, I'm going to blame men on this, because sitting around meditating in their caves, not that there weren't women meditating in their caves, but I think I'm going to blame the men on this. I don't know if this is factually accurate, but, whatever, whoever, they're sitting in their caves 10,000 years ago, whenever, and they're thinking, oh, this is really the way to spirituality, is sitting in my cave. The more painful the rock I'm sitting on and lean against, the better. This whole idea that starting to promote this idea that suffering is a good thing, and that, oh, by the way, celibacy, no sex, okay? And I think that it became what I call a self-referential group of people sitting around thinking, yeah, I had this amazing experience in meditation, blah, blah, blah. Maybe it's because I'm not having sex, and then another one says, yeah, maybe you're right. And I don't think it started coming out, with these absolutes immediately. It's like, this is like a self-referential group meeting, a group of people talking with each other, and they're just kind of supporting each other without any external voices. And then it becomes truth. And then it becomes a religion. And then it becomes a thou shalt not have sex.
A rule,
and
right.
I think that's, in a nutshell, in a very short, I just summed up about 10,000 years of history on sex in about 2 minutes there. So I think that's basically it. So I postulate this idea in my essay, maybe sex is just neutral. Maybe it's like, and I use the example of buying Jimmy Choo stilettos, because I've dated a few women who really like them. And then so it's like, really like get so emotionally invested in buying the shoes, which is great, but is it really anything other than just going to a store and buying shoes? It's actually a neutral act, really, that has that we can invest a lot of emotion in it. I'm into certain, clothing and so forth that I really like emotionally and so forth, but it's just a piece of cloth, really. So that's what I mean when I say sex is more neutral. It's an act. It's a physical act. But maybe it's more than that. Maybe it could be more than that. And so we talk about that. But I also talk about the how and not just the what, in terms of sex and relationships. And I just touch on it here. I actually have a whole other set of essays that I didn't put in here about relationships and how we treat each other and so forth in the relationships. But can sex be more than just neutral too? And I think it can be. It could be a source of a lot of things, right? Physical pleasure, a way to relax and release, improve one's sleep, a way to release endorphins, a way to surrender oneself to another person, another being, right? And then maybe a means of connecting with another emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Can be a lot of different things more than just neutral. And so then I talk about this idea of spiritual sex. Is there a possibility of having spiritual sex? Is that an oxymoron? Is it contradictory, in other words? And I think not the way I look at it. And I think that in the end, it's all a matter of choice, personal choice, in our intention. Back to the how idea. of how are we approaching the other person that we're engaged in having sex and so forth. To me, connection is a manner of spirituality, whether it's through sex or whether it's through meditation or whether it's through anything. It's about connecting. Now, meditation, connecting with myself first within, but maybe in having sex with somebody else, then that's connection with that other being, but it's still a connection thing, right? And so that's the way I pose these different ways in this essay for people to look at sex through these different perspectives and angles and so forth. But the bottom line is, and I sum it up all in one sentence, is that we come at this with respect, kindness, and without guilt.
Great. Awesome. Thank you. And, the other thing that I learned in doing that conference, I mean, even trying to market it, like on social media, we would have to redo ads because certain words couldn't be used, and there seems to be a lot of shame and secrecy around sex and spirituality. Like, people will talk about angels all day long and these mystical experiences, but to bring, sex and intimacy, especially in a world where there's been so much trauma around it, when we look at sexual abuse that's happening and rape and, all of that, it's just such a charged, topic. And then to bring it into the conversation of spirituality and, presence and being conscious and kind.
Just when you bring, that's when I interrupt you, and you talk about rape and so forth and bad actions, we'll call them, okay, as it relates to sex. That falls into the cruelty category, right? Mm-hmm. And we talk about that in one of my essays about cruelty, and several of the essays about cruelty and treating other people badly. And so, right at the beginning of this essay about sex, I say, we're carving that out. This is not what we're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But just wanted to mention it too.
Yeah, no, it's important. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And very lastly here, 186. So I jumped all the way to the back of 10 spiritual red flags. So you've got 10 spiritual red flags here. And, I think that this is just kind of a good reference point because you talk about, or you help people, you help the reader who's reading this, like what to watch out for. Maybe if you are learning by a spiritual teacher, or how do you know what spiritual teachers are legit? Like, who should you follow per se, or learn from? Follow may not be the best word. Mm-hmm. And so there were a couple. I mean, the whole thing is great. I don't know if we'll get a chance to actually read through all of them, but let's take the first two. So the first one is scientists or spiritual teachers who espouse the laws of thermodynamics, especially the first law, energy cannot be created or destroyed, who also talk about God or anything being the creator of the universe. There is no need for such a creator if energy cannot be created or destroyed. So that's, there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
And I would say that I have, as I was reading this, I was just thinking of a lot of guests that I've had on the podcast. And I've had quite a few people that have had near-death experiences who have met the creator, or who have met God, or who have met this divine intelligence. And most of them typically say that there wasn't a physical being that they saw, but it was a feeling of presence that they just knew that is what it was. So I just wanted to, let's start there, because I've talked to a lot of people that I feel like they do talk about God and they do talk about the creator of the universe, and they're very sure that this is. Yep.
And the reason they're very sure is because their belief system is so strong. That's why they're very sure. Is because their belief system is so strong before they had the NDE, before they had the near-death experience or whatever the spiritual experience was. They had a very, very strong belief in a creator. And so when they have that feeling of connection with this being, whoever the being may be, the first knee-jerk reaction is to filter it through one's belief system. And if one's belief system is such that one has firmly believed in as a creator, then that feeling is immediately projected to be, that's God. And so, or if they conversely had come into the experience thinking really into Archangel Michael, the feeling they have, that's Archangel Michael. or if they're really Buddhist, very, very firmly entrenched in the whole Buddhist philosophy and thinking and religion, then when they have that same experience that you're describing, that's Buddha. So they're filtering it through their belief system, which is if their belief system is very firmly entrenched within them. If it's not really a firm belief system within them before they have that spiritual experience, the NDE or whatever, then they're not so sure. And it could be this, it could be that, but I had this experience, all right? So depending on who you're talking with, that's usually the reasoning behind it, is my experience, because I've had many experiences on the other side, and I come at things like I'm open. I'm like an open book in terms of that. And, I've had experiences, I interpret them, and I have certain belief systems around my experiences that I interpret them. But I'm even open to the fact that maybe reincarnation doesn't even exist. Now, I can't come up with an alternative reasoning for all these experiences I've had over the last 6,000 years, these memories. But if somebody came up to me with that, I'm open to it. So I'm kind of open. And I go to the other, and I've had experiences, as you know, many times on the other side. And it's all the conversations I've had with all the various beings that, I've communicated with on the other side. Shankara, who was Vyasa in a previous lifetime, those people who know anything about Vedic tradition. Vyasa wrote the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita. So Shankara, Jehovah, Jesus, John the Baptist, I don't know who I'm leaving out, but, a whole bunch, Yogananda, etc., is that nobody has experienced that there is a God yet. But people are, we're open and so forth and so on. But to this point here, what I'm saying is that if the spiritual red flag, forget about whether you believe in a God or not, even if there is a God and people believe in a God, God cannot be the creator of the universe, because in my experience, based on the first law of thermodynamics, energy cannot be created or destroyed. That means if energy in the universe is energy, as far as my experience is concerned, and is already always existed, then you can't have a beginning to an always. It's either eternal or it's not.
Or it's not.
Now,
right.
you could say that it's not eternal, and that's okay. And that's somebody's belief system. That's all right. That doesn't fit with my experience. But again, I'm not here to change people's belief systems. People need to go with what their experience is. And I encourage people to follow, to create their own belief systems around their own experiences, and those, and then around teachers who they trust. But, if you have a belief in eternity, you cannot have a creator. Makes no logical sense. Now, you and I talked briefly before we started this podcast together here, and could there be a creator of human beings? Yes, there could be a creator of human beings. But my soul, as Kelvin Chin, and in my other previous lifetimes, et cetera, as a human being, and also as an animal, as an eagle, I have a memory of being an animal. So all of those souls, what I'm saying, the soul is eternal, not necessarily the human species. So could there have been a creator of the human species, whether it's one being, two beings, 12 beings, or 1,000 beings created the human species? I don't know. But is that possible? Yes. And does that violate the first law of thermodynamics? No, because my energy, my soul, my individual soul energy, to me, that's the eternal part, not my physical body. So whether I was a physical human being or an animal or this or that or anything, people could have, not people, but some beings could have created that. That's possible, right?
Right. Yeah. And couldn't the infinite energy create a God that some people may be experiencing or seeing? Like, could God be, like you said, like, there could be somebody or a being out there that has created humans, and maybe there's another layer of something that creates what people are referring to as the creator that maybe they're experiencing.
But see that. So that's the typical philosophical religious argument. Okay.
Loop.
But you can't. But you can't. It ends. It has to end.
Right.
It becomes illogical. Mm-hmm. There is no creator of a creator of everything. Okay, because then you don't have eternity.
Because then right, gotcha.
All right. So you'll hear that argument in a lot of religious institutions, and people will just buy it. But that's an example of cognitive dissonance, that people are just buying blindly and not thinking through logically. It makes no logical sense. But if the religious institution argues it fervently enough, people usually go, okay, all right.
Okay.
But it's not. It makes no sense.
Okay. And that goes into number 2 of the 10 spiritual flags. Spiritual teachers who speak about eternity and the creation of the universe. It's impossible. They are mutually exclusive. Either the universe is eternal, beyond the measurement of time, uninfluenced by the field of change, or it's not. If it's eternal, that means with no beginning and no end, creation requires a beginning. So you basically answered my questions just through 1 and 2.
Yep.
And well, let's just kind of run through the other spiritual teachers who tell you they are not your gurus, but expect you to follow what they say without question because they know what is good for you.
That's a class. Yeah. Walks like a duck, talks like a duck. It's a duck.
Yeah. Or guru. Look at their actions, not just their words.
Yeah, that's the cognitive dissonance thing. Right.
Yeah. And number 4, ditto for number 3, for angels or other spiritual teachers channeling from the other side. So I've talked to channelers that have been on the podcast. So what are your thoughts about that?
Oh, the channeling is real. I mean, but the thing is, but the issue is, where are they getting the information from on the other side? So are they getting it from a being, whether it's a dead human or a prior dead human, or whether it's a being who's never been a human or whatever, call them angels, call them whatever, on the other side, who has a belief that they know better than you do. And then they'll tell you, they'll do the thou shalt stuff, right? This is the way it is. You know, you humans don't know what you're talking about, da-da-da-da-da-da. You need to listen to me. To me, when I hear that, I run the other way.
Yeah. So basically what you're really encapsulating too with these spiritual teachers or gurus is that if you hear anybody give you an absolute of this is the absolute way, run. Yeah,
because it violates free will. That's the absolutes violate free will. That it assumes that they know everything about everything, that anything that will happen, and they know everything about everybody's free will choices in the universe. And so we got quadrillions of minds on planet Earth. How many other planets there are? You know, I've been on other planets. I've lived on other planets, so that's a whole other thing. But you know, it's like, how many other beings are there? Because it's a big number, whatever it is. And so that presumes when somebody says, "Oh no, I know what you need to do. You absolutely need to." When absolutes presume omniscience, and that is pretty. It's a lot of hubris there.
Yeah. Awesome.
A lot of arrogance.
Yes. And then, you know, the 10 spiritual red flags just kind of, you know, continue down, like to be aware of spiritual teachers who tell you that you are being or will be judged spiritually by anyone now or after death. Spiritual teachers who tell you that you are a being or will be punished spiritually by anyone, or that you get credit for doing good deeds, hell or karma. Anyone who tells you that your level of spiritual development or your level of consciousness tells you they know your level of spiritual development and level of consciousness. Spiritual teachers who say there is an endpoint, a goal, a state of perfection, enlightenment, and nirvana. Anyone who uses the word destiny or phrases like it's meant to be to describe a preordained result or predetermined path, that is absolutely certain, because this violates, again, like you're saying, the principle of free will. And then number 10, anyone who uses the existence of the afterlife or other lifetimes, reincarnation, as evidence that God exists. There are two very different concepts. We can have experiences and memories of both heaven and other lifetimes and still be an agnostic or atheist, a non-believer in God. The afterlife is a structural place that exists whether you believe in God or not.
Right.
So those are some 10 spiritual red flags. So this book is great. I mean, well, it's not a book of essays, I should call it, right? Yeah. It's a collection of essays. And
exactly.
And I know that even though we're recording this podcast a little bit earlier, on April 26th, you had said that you have some free monthly gatherings that you're going to be doing. And you're also offering our podcast listeners, what was it, $50 off your Turning Within meditation classes. So let's let people know where they can find you, where they can take your classes.
Right.
How do they get the free $50? And you are going to be doing these free monthly gatherings to talk about the essays in this book that we've been talking about today.
Yeah, probably the easiest thing for people to do is Google my name. They Google my name, Kelvin Chin. I'm the first 2 pages on Google. So, and they can find any of my websites that way. But one of the websites to go to, the easiest one, you go to kelvinchin.org. They're org.org because that's a nonprofit. I do my work through my nonprofits. kelvinchin.org. Now that one will, you can get this book and so forth. You can also send me a message, really, and you could just, probably the easiest thing if you wanted to sign up for any of my classes is probably the easiest thing is just to go to kelvinchin.org and send me a message on the contact page. You can find my other websites by going to the bottom of the page of any of my websites. I have 4 websites. You can go bottom of any page and you'll see hot links to the other 3. And so the one, Kelvin Chin author, obviously, is my book website. And the other ones, I have meditation one, and I have my Overcoming the Fear of Death one. And kelvinchin.org is my more spiritual website. So they can go to any of them, and they can just shoot me a message. And if they're interested in this free monthly series that I'm doing, I'm talking about different topics each month out of this book. So as April said, there's 67 essays in here. There's a lot of material in here. And probably the best way to read the book is just go to the table of contents and just see what jumps out at you. That's what I'm suggesting people do. But free monthly series, I'm starting it on this Monday. Where people will see this after. But the reason it's on April 26th is because that happens to be the 1900th birthday of Marcus Aurelius. So I'm starting the monthly series on his birthday, and after that, it'll be on Saturdays monthly. And so people can see the dates and the topics that I'll be talking about, again, on my website.
Great. Well, Kelvin, thank you so much. And for those of you who go to his website, go to the contact page, let him know that you heard his podcast on the Path 11 podcast, and you'll get that $50 off for the Turning Within class. So, Kelvin, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, to see you, to support your work, because it's wonderful. It's great. I'm still using the technique that you taught me.
Great. Awesome.
So, just love it. And anything we can do to help spread the word with all the great stuff that you're doing, come on back anytime you'd like. Okay.
Okay, April. Great to see you. Thank you.
All right. Great to see you too.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed that podcast. And remember, you can also watch this podcast on path11tv.com for free. Again, no subscription necessary. But if you would like to subscribe, please take the code podcast30 off of your monthly or annual subscription. And I will see and talk to you guys next time.